Spatula season comes a little earlier this year. The top tight end in the 2024 class has flipped his commitment. We'll tell you what it means for both schools involved. And the transfer portal is once again open for business. So who are the top names in already? Our portal expert breaks it all down. Plus, all the recruiting wins as of late are putting the happy in Happy Valley. We check in with Penn State recruiting and more as the college football recruiting show starts right now. Alongside Blair and Gulo, I'm Emily Proud. Submit your questions in the chat. We'll answer them at the end of the show. I see Lions 24/7 already in the chat. Excited to talk to Tyler Calvaruso later on in the show. Also, subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. That's the only way you can be a part of that chat. And like the video so we know that you're watching. So you go hit that like button. Blair and I, we're going to go hit those headlines. Bring out the spatula. The #1 tight end in the 2024 class has flipped his commitment. Landen Thomas is flipping from Georgia to Florida State. Now, he's actually been locked in with the Dogs since last July. The Noles now have the 5th-ranked recruiting class. Blair, how big a win is this for Florida State?
A monstrous recruiting win that Florida State fans, I think, would hope would now have some finality. Emily, Landen Thomas initially committed to the Seminoles back in April of 2021. So that's 2 years ago. This is his second decommitment. It's a huge pull to go into the state of Georgia once again for the top-rated player at his position.
Ooh, still a long ways to go until it's officially official. More on him in a few minutes with Steve Wiltfong. First, more news out of the Sunshine State, Florida, landing 5-star safety Xavier Filsaime, the #2 safety in the class, picked the Gators over SEC foes Georgia and LSU, among more. Florida now boasts the top 10 class with 7 commits. What did Billy Napier just add with the 5-star safety, Blair?
A lot of speed. One of the fastest defensive backs in America. He had a couple 10.5 100-meter times as a sophomore last spring, and his stock has been rising and rising. He's a defender with great straight line speed, and he has the range and instincts to be a great player in the SEC.
All right, the Gamecocks securing a commitment from 4-star offensive tackle Josiah Thompson on Friday. He is the #2 offensive tackle in the class. What did Shane Beamer just add for his O-line?
A franchise left tackle type with a great first step and excellent physical traits. Thompson is twitchy, he has great agility, and on top of carrying significant frame upside, it doesn't hurt that he's the state's best prospect. So Shane Beamer adds another big recruiting win ahead of the spring evaluation period.
Gotta secure those borders. We now have a top 5 for 4-star wide receiver Gatlin Bear. It's Boise State, Michigan, Nebraska, Oregon, and TCU. Bear is the 9th-ranked wideout in the class, and per our Brandon Huffman, he plans to visit all 5 schools before officially announcing. Blair, what are your thoughts on this final 5?
It's a great mix of options, Emily. You've got the defending national runner-up in TCU. You've got a rebuilding program in Nebraska. You've got Tracktown USA in Oregon. You've got Michigan, which has reached back-to-back college football playoffs. And then the home state school in Boise State. So a little bit of everything on the list for Gatlin Bear. And we'll be interested to see what the recruiting pitches are once he takes those official visits.
I just feel like we're getting a little bit closer when we narrow it down to 5. Let's bring in our director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, I feel weird talking about spatula season without the man who coined the term. So let's talk about Landen Thomas's flip from Georgia to Florida State in a massive win for Mike Norvell. How did he and that staff pull it off?
Well, as Blair alluded to, this is like a spatula sword fight because he has flipped from Florida State to Georgia back to Florida State. And I don't think Georgia's going to put down their spatula the rest of the cycle here as they, really covet this young man as well. But look, Florida State talking to Landen Thomas about his commitment to the Seminoles. He just said the energy around the program. You feel they really want you. He's taken several visits there, and I think it was the place there where he felt the most love. And he just continued to talk about the energy that coaching staff has, and that they're going to push you to be the best you can be. And that's what Coach Norvell tells them every time. Look, it's hard for me to pinpoint the biggest win on the trail for Florida State this weekend, because they obviously landed Landen Thomas, but they also were able to get their coveted quarterback recruit, Luke Cromenhoek, to shut down his recruitment after a couple visits to Penn State, and the nation's number 3 running back, Cam Davis, to shut down his recruitment as well. And they also landed prolific receiver BJ Gibson. So Mike Norvell and that staff have the hot hand right now. The Seminoles are the hottest team in the country right now on the recruiting trail.
And speaking of Florida State, Steve, a player from the state of California, 4-star offensive tackle Manasseh Etete, was also able to make it out to Tallahassee. You put in a crystal ball for the Seminoles on Sunday. What has you leaning Florida State?
Yeah, and our colleague Brandon Huffman also logged his 24/7 Sports crystal ball in favor of Florida State. And it's an easy prediction when the young man tells you coming into the visit, Florida State was top 3, and coming out, they're in the first spot. You clearly know who the one to beat is. And look, he just really enjoyed being around Coach Alex Atkins, likes the way that coach coaches up his players and keeps it real with the recruits. And, getting around Coach Norvell again and seeing the turnaround that they had last season and what's in store in the future, he's very excited about possibly joining that.
All right, moving on from Florida State, but elsewhere in the state of Florida, 5-star running back Jarrett Gibson visiting Texas this weekend. The Longhorns lead it in the crystal ball. You, of course, have one in for him there as well. Coming out of this visit, this most recent one, we know he's been there a few times now. Are you still feeling strong about your pick for Texas here?
Absolutely. It's clear that Texas continues to set the bar in this recruitment here, led by Tashard Choice. And Jarrett talked about getting around the electric energy that Tashard Choice has, and loved being around the team and the chemistry that they have and the growth that they've had under Coach Steve Sarkisian and the staff. And then talked to his dad, and his dad said it was an amazing, amazing experience. And he highlighted the tailgating for the spring game, said that the tailgating for the Texas spring game is better than the tailgating for the Florida-Georgia cocktail party in October. So that kind of surprised me, but they love being there, love the atmosphere, love the tradition at running back at Texas, love what they did with Bijan Robinson. And he's going to take his last official visit, the last scheduled one anyway, the last weekend of June, after trips to Georgia, Miami, and Tennessee. So I think it's setting up nicely for Texas. Now, the program I'm keeping an eye on is Miami. I think that they've made a move in this recruitment. He was there earlier this month, and he's looking to get back on an unofficial visit before he starts his round of official visits. So Miami, a contender here, but Texas continues to set the tone.
Another player that Texas is in on is Micah Hudson, 5-star in-state wide receiver. You put out an article on Monday, Steve. Who are some programs he's excited about at this stage?
Yeah, I don't think this recruitment's is not close to being done here. A lot of major contenders in here, and he talked about Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, the consistency and player development of those programs. Talked about Ohio State being receiver U, and that's a place where you can get pushed by the best. Texas, the NFL pedigree on that staff, from the position coach to Coach Sarkisian, really impresses him. And Texas A&M hanging around in this recruitment. He loves talking to Jimbo Fisher. But the program that I think is in a sneaky good spot, the program that he has the best relationship with right now, is Texas Tech. He knows more coaches there than any other program. He feels connected to a lot of guys on that staff and in the locker room, loves Coach Joey McGuire and what they're building. And he's their top overall target. So I think Texas Tech is a program to keep an eye on for Micah Hudson going into official visits.
Interesting stuff there. 2024 5-star Ryan Wingo has, of course, come up quite a bit on this show in the past. He's the number 2 player at his position, so that's understandable. But this morning, you changed your crystal ball to Georgia to land the talented playmaker. That is the theme of today's show. Why Georgia?
Yeah, so we said Florida State's the hottest team in the country on the recruiting trail, but this could be Georgia's world here soon with some of the guys that they're in on. And Ryan Wingo is going to take his official visit to Georgia the first weekend. And we've talked about it on this show. We've talked about it on Whip Around. We think Georgia's been the team to beat for Ryan Wingo since mid-March, but continuing to talk to the Wingo camp and other people with knowledge of that recruitment, it was time to change my crystal ball from Tennessee to Georgia. Now, I'm not ruling out several other schools that are in the mix, including the Vols. And that new rule just came out where kids are not going to be limited to just 5 official visits. Ryan Wingo is a prospect that I could see taking more than 5. He's got 2 scheduled. He's got 1 the first weekend of June for Georgia. He locked in Missouri for the weekend of June 25th. Oregon's in play for an official visit. Tennessee's in play. Alabama, Texas A&M, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State. So this is a young man that's been to a lot of campuses, likes a lot of schools. I think Georgia's the team to beat. I think Brian McClendon's going to be out there on Monday. They've built a great relationship with him, but he could take several official visits. But I like where the Bulldogs stand right now.
With official visits being unlimited, I'm really interested to see which player across the country leads the nation in official visits later this spring and obviously heading into the summer and in the season. Steve, as we discussed earlier, Landen Thomas off the board for Georgia. They're still going to try with him, but they look really good for another player at that position. That would be Jaden Riddell. You have your crystal ball on the Bulldogs. How close could assistant coach Todd Hartley be to adding another top player at the position?
Well, he has 3 June official visits locked in: Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. He's been to Alabama and Tennessee a couple times now, went to big games on both campuses, returned to each place in March. And I think Georgia and their track record at the position, his relationship with the staff, his relationship with guys that Georgia's recruiting and have committed, I like where Georgia stands going into that round of official visits. I think the Bulldogs are in a great position here. And with that, I logged the 24/7 Sports crystal ball for Georgia here. But obviously they have some stiff competition, particularly from fellow SEC heavyweights, Alabama and Tennessee.
Steve, thank you so much, as always, for all of that great intel. You also provide a lot of intel online, and sometimes the only way to do that is if you are a VIP member to 24/7 Sports. Also, you're not seeing it. I'm seeing it, though. Steve is putting his thumb up as a reminder to like this video too, but we are running a promotion right now. You see it here, 50% off those annual VIP memberships. If you are a fan of a college football team, trust me, you're gonna wanna get in on this. It expires at midnight though, so go ahead and jump in. The spring transfer portal window is officially open, and although things have been much quieter than the winter window, there are still some notable names available. Bear Alexander topping that list. Anytime you got a Georgia defender, there's going to be some interest there. You got some offensive linemen in the mix, some edge players, a couple wide receivers, and there are quarterbacks. Chance Nolan's been hanging out in the portal for quite some time, and when it is time to talk transfer portal, there's really only one man for the job. Our transfer portal expert, it is Chris Hummer. Chris, let's start at the top of that list. I said it, Georgia defensive lineman Bear Alexander, considered a top 15 player in our rankings. What is the latest on the former Bulldogs' future?
There just aren't many people that size that move the way he does, and he's a very popular guy. But I will say the word on Bear Alexander before he even went in the portal was USC, and I would still consider USC the favorite. USC has been very aggressive, gathering assets through the transfer portal, especially in the spring window. We saw it last year with Jordan Addison. We saw it with Eric Gentry coming over from Arizona State as well. I think they are very likely to land Bear Alexander, but teams like Oklahoma will certainly take a swing here. We've talked about this before. Bear Alexander is not allowed to transfer to another SEC school, so a lot of the usual suspects are off the board here because of SEC rules. But I think USC is certainly the favorite, with teams like Oklahoma lurking in the background trying to get a shot.
USC versus Oklahoma, the fans are going to eat that one up if it comes down to those two programs for Bear Alexander. And speaking of USC, Chris, Gary Bryant looks like one of the best receivers in the transfer portal. Only one crystal ball prediction for him, and that's to Oregon. What are you hearing regarding the former USC Trojan?
Bryant's taken official visits to Texas A&M, Oregon, Arizona in recent months. He's been in the portal for quite a while. He was a winter entry. He's going to graduate before he moves on to his next stop. And I'm rolling with my guy, Greg Biggins. He's the one who put in the crystal ball to Oregon. I know Oregon feels pretty good about where it sits with Gary Bryant, and a decision's coming up pretty soon for Gary Bryant as well. So I think Oregon could be in for some good news here in the near future.
We'll keep an eye on that. We're about 15 minutes into the show, so I'm going to go ahead and ask all the people watching, which actually is, we've got a lot of people watching the show today. Not a lot of likes, though, so I'm going to ask one thing from you. Just go ahead and hit that like button. I'd love to get to 50. We're actually pretty close to that, but we got more transfer portal news to talk about here. Jackson State transfer J.D. Davis has obvious connections to Colorado, a little bit of Jackson State pipeline there, but he has some other suitors. Davis, fresh off a visit to Texas A&M. There's some other SEC schools also interested. Chris, where do things stand with his recruitment?
Davis is an interesting player. This is a guy who was at Hutchinson Community College, then he went to Middle Tennessee, then he ended up at Jackson State, and now he's very likely going to have the opportunity to go Power 5, which is something, in talking to him, I know he really is excited to have the opportunity to do. He had a great visit at Texas A&M. He told me it was phenomenal. He used similar language to describe his visit to Kentucky as well, a place he's visited previously. This upcoming week, he's scheduled to have trips to UCF as well as Colorado, and a lot of familiar people on that Colorado staff, obviously. And Oklahoma recently stepped in with an offer as well with J.D. Davis. There are very few linebackers in the portal that moves the way he does. He's a sideline-to-sideline backer, can flow over the top of a defensive line and attack the gaps when they're there. And he is one of the most popular players in the portal. I think Colorado ultimately is going to be pretty tough to beat here, but it's going to be hard to turn down schools like Texas A&M, Kentucky, and Oklahoma down as well. Like, this is a very in-demand player, and Deion Sanders is going to have a fight on his hands.
Chris, a player that maybe a lot of our viewers aren't familiar with, Varkey's Gums, is trying to make that transition from Group of 5 to Power 5, one of the better tight ends in the transfer portal. Who are some teams involved with the transfer?
I don't think he's going to have any issues making that transition because he's a very popular guy right now. There are very few tight ends in the portal, and it's a very in-demand position. And he's scheduled to take a visit to Arkansas later this week. Our guy Colin Kennedy from 24/7 Sports actually recently reported that. He's also gotten offers from schools like Utah and Oregon. But just talking to people who know Varkey's, I think Arkansas is in really good shape here if they impress him on that visit. It's a position in need for Arkansas, and I think Gums is going into the visit with a pretty open mind about what the Razorbacks could be for him.
All right, Chris, we talked about this on our 2-hour Portal All Access show yesterday. You were just in town, now you're back home. Hardest working man right now when the portal is open. This guy is working very hard. But we talked about the offensive linemen in the portal, the bells of the ball almost. And our friend Carl Reed was encouraging everybody, if you are an offensive lineman, to go ahead and test the waters in the portal because they want you. I want to highlight one guy in particular, though, Cameron Johnson. What do we need to know about the interest in the Houston lineman?
He's a very popular guy. I mean, he's a first-team all-conference player in the American for Houston. He was a really good interior guard for them this year, and he has a ton of offers in front of him. He's fresh off a visit to Missouri, a team I know our guy Carl knows well. That visit went really well from what I understand, but Missouri's going to have to hold off some teams, including USC. I feel like we talk about USC with almost every transfer, and that's again the case here. The Trojans are looking to add another interior piece to that offensive line, and they'll host him later this week. And Cameron Johnson also told me over the weekend that he has visits set up to Colorado and Arizona State as well. Both teams looking to shore up their offensive line. So maybe it's a little bit of Prime versus Lincoln Riley battles here for the transfer portal, which will be interesting. But USC is a tough team to turn down in the portal, and I'll see how that goes. But Missouri's going to fight hard, and he would have a starting spot at Missouri if he ended up there. So it'll be really interesting down the stretch to see how those visits go.
And lastly, Chris, Jordan Hudson, 4-star wide receiver in the 2022 class. 24/7 Sports broke the news that he entered the portal today. What's the latest with him?
Yeah, I reported this morning that Jordan Hudson was going to go in the portal. This is something that had been brewing a little bit over the last 24 hours. And frankly, like even going back to December, there was talks that Jordan Hudson can go in the portal, former top 100 recruit. And I think talking to people kind of around the situation this morning, that I would consider SMU and Arizona State the early favorites. Jordan Hudson is a former SMU commit. He's from the Dallas area. That's a program he always really identified with. He flipped with Sonny Dykes when Sonny Dykes went from SMU to TCU. But I think the Mustangs are definitely in it. I would also spotlight Arizona State here. Rashad Samples, their new wide receivers coach, was his primary recruiter at both SMU and TCU. Hudson has a really tight relationship with Samples. I think there's going to be a big push there to bring him to Arizona State. And I think it's going to be those two teams battling with maybe a few others getting in the mix. Hudson's also a former Oklahoma commit, for example, so he has connections a lot of places.
May not have the star power of the first window, but there's definitely still a lot of news. Chris, thanks for breaking it all down for us. All right, Orlando was the place to be this weekend for those who weren't packed inside Disney World. Overtime's OT7 camp was a hotbed for talent. Some top names in the Sunshine State and beyond were in attendance, and lucky for us, our director of scouting, Andrew Ivins, was in attendance and is now here to tell us all about it. Andrew, let's start at the top with the alpha dog, Notre Dame quarterback CJ Carr. What about his performance made him stand out from the other talented prospects there?
Well, Emily, it was a really deep pool of quarterbacks. You know, there was guys from all around the country there, some high-profile names, and CJ Carr is the one that stood out to me. Obviously, he was the alpha dog for us for that event, led his team to the finals. A little bit of a weird format for this 7-on-7 tournament. Quarterbacks could run in certain situations, and the defenses had multiple blitzes, and that's kind of what stood out about CJ Carr. He was making plays off script. I know it's not tackle, but he was kind of operating, off schedule, and he made some impressive throws. There was also a number of one-play drives, and look, I'll be honest, we're still trying to figure out this 2024 quarterback group and how we're going to stack them, who's going to finish in that top 32. And I'm a big fan of CJ Carr, who is headed to Notre Dame. I really liked what he did down the stretch there as a junior in the Michigan State playoffs. I think he's a guy that doesn't get enough credit for just his ability when things break down, get out of trouble, keep his eyes downfield. Saw that over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday there in Orlando. So good performance for CJ Carr. I think if you're a Notre Dame fan, this is the guy. This is the quarterback of the future. You look at their recent quarterback takes, what's in that quarterback room. CJ Carr is the name to know. He's ranked where he is for a reason, and we'll see where he finishes come February.
Downfield touch is what really stood out to me about CJ Carr when I saw him at the Battle Tournament in Las Vegas earlier this offseason. Can fit those throws into that third level and has really good vision and anticipation. After CJ Carr, you mentioned it being a loaded quarterback group, Andrew. Who else among that signal caller group impressed you?
Jake Merklinger, the Tennessee commit. I thought maybe he'd be the alpha dog, because him and CJ Carr, I was standing on one field. Those guys were trading throw after throw. And, I was talking with some of Jake's wide receivers. These are kind of all-star events. The kids really don't know each other that well. And one of his targets told me, hey, Jake never gets rattled. And Jake doesn't have the strongest arm out there, but he's one of the most experienced signal callers in the 2024 cycle. He started over 30 games the past 3 years. You're seeing it on tape. He's an athletic guy that can run. But what stood out to me about Jake is his ability to squeeze the football into tight windows. He doesn't make a ton of bad decisions. And again, when things didn't go well, he was calm and cool. And I think Tennessee, when you look at their long-term picture at quarterback, that's what they need. I mean, Nico Iamaleava is there. We saw what he did in spring football, but he's still very green, doesn't have a ton of starts under his belt. Now they bring in a guy like Jake Merklinger who can push Nico at some point, but, if he has to come off the bench and come out of the bullpen, I think that's perfect. That sets up well for Josh Heupel and what they got going in Knoxville. The other quarterback I want to highlight, Trevor Jackson. Get familiar with this name. We know the quarterback dominoes have fallen here, right? A lot of arms have come off the board. Guys have secured spots. That means schools are now pivoting to different quarterbacks, guys that most fans don't know about. Trevor Jackson's a guy I've been tracking for well over a year now. Saw him throw at Florida Atlantic. I'm like, all right, this guy's got a chance. He's got the tools. Picked up an offer this morning from Texas A&M. Told me Penn State's also involved. Illinois has reached out. Oregon's reached out. Basically anyone looking for a quarterback. And to me, Trevor Jackson, he throws a tight spiral. Again, another guy that can run around and beat you with his legs, but he's got big 10-inch hands. I think he's going to be a name to know moving forward, and he's headed to the Elite 11 finals. Punched his ticket to the showcase event a few weeks ago at a regional in Orlando. So Trevor Jackson, a favorite of mine, and a guy that I think is going to shoot up recruiting boards around the country.
Trevor Jackson, remember the name. All right, in your article about this event, go check that out on 247sports.com, required reading. You mentioned four-star tight end Caleb Odom was arguably the biggest mismatch at that tournament. So what makes him such a force on the field?
Emily, I was so excited when I saw he was on the events roster. You put on the junior tape for Caleb Odom. This is a guy that had over 1,000 receiving yards, 62 catches, 13 touchdowns. But the question was, how big is he, right? He looks kind of narrow. Can he be a true tight end? I still think he's a flex type, but he's over 215 pounds, told me he's 218 pounds. So I think this is a guy that can get it done in the SEC, the Big Ten, wherever he ends up. But he's got a monster catch radius. He can create separation at the top of his routes. And then as an open field runner, again, two-hand touch type of setting, but he made some much smaller defensive backs miss in space, and he was able to pick up yardage. So I think he's a mismatch. He's our number 5 tight end right now. You guys talked about it earlier on the show, right? Georgia just lost Landen Thomas. Well, they recently had Caleb Odom on campus. I know they're after a few other tight ends as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they turned up the heat a little bit on him. So Caleb Odom, checked out in person. That's why these in-person evaluations are so important. We want to make sure the film lines up with what we see when we see them, in street clothes. And Caleb Odom exceeded expectations for me.
Jason Mitchell went all the way from California to Orlando and was one of the standouts on the defensive side of the ball. Andrew, what did he do in particular that you liked about his work in the secondary?
Two things, Blair. Sunday's when I really got a chance to kind of scout Jason Mitchell. He had 2 interceptions in one game, and then the other game I saw, he did an excellent job of kind of locking up Jeremiah Smith, the 5-star wide receiver headed to Ohio State. You're seeing it right here. Jason played a lot of safety as a 11th grader, also played some quarterback in certain situations, but he was out on the boundary, out in perimeter. I thought his ability to track the football, turn his head, and then get the takeaway was certainly notable. And he's a long, lanky DB. I think at the most recent NFL scouting combine, they had 60 defensive backs there. 40 of them were over 6 foot. Jason Mitchell's a kid that's pushing 6'2", 6'3", kind of looks like Elias Ricks. Remember the former blue chip recruit that is now at Alabama. So a guy we'll see and continue to track. I'm excited to see him as a senior at Bosco. He's going to be there. I know they're playing a national schedule. We have him marked down right now as a safety. After watching him move around, I think there's a chance that he could maybe be a corner. That's only going to add value for the school of his choice.
All right, we're getting close to 100 likes, so if you have not already hit that like button, please go ahead and do so. Andrew, one more question for you. The event also showcasing some of the top talent in future classes. We love to get a jump on some of these guys. Of the underclassmen who are there, who caught your eye?
Well, that's all I've been watching for the past week, right? We got the 2025 update coming on Wednesday, expanding that top 100 to a top 247. And I'll give you guys a little peek right now. Bryce Underwood, our number 1 quarterback, is going to remain the number 1 signal caller for us in that 2025 cycle. I saw him back in January at an event down in Miami. So now we're in April. And I was just, I don't know if he got bigger, but this guy's got the frame that you are looking for. I mean, he is 6'2", thickly built. It almost looks kind of like a linebacker. It was impressive to see him throw the football. He was on a team that was rotating quarterbacks. A lot to like about him. He's a guy we're going to continue to talk about. 27-1 his first 2 years at the varsity level, has won a state title. He's thrown for more yards than anyone else in the class of 2025. So he's one to put up there in the storage. Everyone's fighting for him. LSU, Michigan, all those schools. And then Julian Lewis, another quarterback, class of 2026. As a freshman, went 14-1 in Georgia's highest classification, led his team to a state title. I thought he threw a good football. Sunday, one game, I had him at 12 of 15 with 2 touchdowns, had 1 interception, but he has the goods. And in that state title game as a freshman, he threw for a record 531 yards. I was talking to him after the event, and I asked, hey, who's involved in the recruitment, just kind of picking his brain. He listed pretty much every blue blood, and he had been there this spring for a spring practice. And talk with colleges, there's already plenty of buzz about this kid who's not even a sophomore in high school yet. So Julian Lewis has a fluid throwing motion, can attack all different levels. I like him. And then the last one, Got to talk about UCF. My guy Gus Malzahn there in Orlando. He was a guest on the podcast. For some reason, this event, I mean, I know it's right down the road from the Knights, but had a ton of UCF flavor. There was a ton of players there. They just picked up a commitment on Friday night from Travion Swint, running back, local kid. I think this is a massive deal. Florida also wanted him. We know what he can do as a runner, ran for over 1,600 yards this past fall, but I loved his ability as a pass catcher. He was a difficult cover all weekend. Not a lot of people are going to know about him, but that was a big win for the Knights. I think this is a guy who reminds me a little bit of Devin Motor Singletary on the smaller side, but he can make you miss, and he can catch the football out of the backfield. And that's super important. So big win for UCF, who continues to recruit well locally, and they need to do that with them headed to the Big 12.
I love it. All right, so Bryce Underwood, number 1, and we just need to stay tuned to figure out the 246 other guys. Number one quarterback.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an important distinction. Okay, so we still need to stay tuned to figure out who is number 1. So get ready for some of those rankings. Andrew, thank you so much for all those great details. You heard him mention the podcast. This is what he means. Go check out the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast with Andrew Ivins and Cooper Patagna. New episodes drop every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, I will remind you, we are continuing to run this 50% off promotion for annual VIP memberships. You will get information on your team that you cannot find anywhere else. You've got to go do it now, though. Actually, not now, after the show is over. But you got to do it tonight because it officially ends at midnight, so jump on that. Happy Valley was rocking this weekend. Penn State spring game served as the backdrop for some high-profile visits, and they are already seeing returns from those visits. So let's talk all about it with our friend Tyler Calvaruso from Lions 24/7. Tyler, Penn State landing commit number 10 already in this class with 4-star offensive lineman Donovan Harbor. That happened earlier today. So why do you think James Franklin and his staff have had so much success doubling the number of 2024 commits they had coming in to this month?
I think the foundation for what has transpired this month really dates back to the fall. They get the 2 Florida cornerbacks, John Mitchell's a top 24/7 prospect, and Antoine Belgrave Shorter. They get them on campus in the fall for the whiteout game visit, and Penn State started to push for those guys from that point on because they sensed that there was a high level of interest from them. So now those are 2 parts of the class. Quentin Martin, the top-ranked recruit in Pennsylvania. I mean, Penn State has been on him for a very long time. You get him on campus multiple times leading up to this month. You get him on campus last month in March for a more intimate visit, a more one-on-one visit with Martin and the Martin family. And that played a major, major part in Penn State sealing the deal with him after a very long pursuit. And just really the relationships that were formed throughout the fall and the winter really just coming into place for Penn State this spring on the commitment front. The staff has placed a huge emphasis on building relationships with these guys early. They accomplished that, and now you're starting to see the success in the class follow.
Tyler, we always talk about package deals, and Emily and I are always wondering how true that could be in recruiting. Well, Penn State now has a chance now with the commitment of Harbor and his teammate, top 24/7 running back Corey Smith. How much will this impact how the Nittany Lions are able to sell their program knowing that Harbor is now a part of that class?
Oh, Blair, man, I think it's a big deal. Talking with Corey Smith and talking with Donovan Harbor, playing at the next level is something those two have discussed. And while Harbor was actually announcing his commitment, Corey Smith was in the Instagram live feed hinting at a decision coming from him as soon as next week. So they make it to campus this past weekend together. Smith has been around before, Harbor not so much. So this was an important visit for him to get a better feel for the program, to get a better feeling for State College, and really everything fell into place for him. You never know how things are going to play out when a guy who hasn't visited a whole lot before makes it to campus. Because, yes, he's been high on Penn State's board, and Penn State had been involved with Harbor for a very long time, but he hadn't been around the program all that often. And you just don't know how he's going to mesh with the staff and the current players and just all the personnel until he gets there. Harbor got there and everything went well. So now that he's on board, Corey Smith was already trending towards Penn State. I think now that Harbor's on board, you're talking about a commitment possibly incoming soon.
Love that. You find all the information everywhere, even an Instagram live feed. That's why you gotta keep on your toes. There's things always happening everywhere. And the Nittany Lions really finding success in the Sunshine State. Franklin dipping into Florida, landing 2 defensive back teammates, speaking of those package deals, and 4-star corner John Mitchell and 3-star Antoine Belgrave Shorter. How has this Penn State staff been able to do what I believe is the seemingly impossible, and that is convince prospects to, wave that 80-degree weather goodbye and play their college ball in State College?
The simple part of the answer is it's Jaywan Sider and it's Terry Smith. Terry Smith gets a lot of credit for what he does recruiting in Western Pennsylvania and recruiting in Pittsburgh. That's where he's well known. But he's developed a lot of that juice in Florida as well, really thanks to the development that he has had with Penn State's defensive backs recently, specifically from Florida. Guys like Cam Miller coming through, Elliot Washington, he's on campus now. Penn State loves what he's been doing as an early enrollee. And then Jaywan Sider, his longstanding relationships in Florida. He's in tight with all the powerhouse programs down there and their coaches. So that plays a big part in Penn State's efforts in the Sunshine State. The one thing that I would say that I think has really separated Penn State and its ability to go down to Florida and get some of its top targets from the state is it's easy to sell kids on Happy Valley being a home away from home during visits. But Penn State has been able to do a really good job of continuing that once they're enrolled and once they're actually part of the program, they all feel at home and they're all comfortable. And Florida may be a big state from top to bottom, but these players know each other and these coaches know each other. If Penn State wasn't doing a good job of making guys truly feel at home in State College, word would be getting back to Florida and, coaches would be reluctant to send their kids there. That's not the case. Penn State has done a very good job in that regard. And I think, we talk about the relationships with the coaching staffs. I think that might be the most important aspect of this whole thing. You get these guys enrolled, you get them in town, and then you continue to do an excellent job with them and grow them as players and people. And that makes its way back to Florida, and I think that's why we are where we are now.
Penn State has a ton of buzz, a ton of recruiting momentum here in this 2024 class, and there's a bunch of hype, obviously, surrounding Drew Aller on the field this coming season. Last cycle, they flipped Jackson Smolik from Tulane late in the cycle, Elite 11 finalist. What's the approach, Tyler, now heading into this 2024 class? Will they take a quarterback? Will they go into the portal? What's the move for them?
Taking a quarterback this cycle is definitely on the radar for Penn State. There's been conversations about possibly 2 quarterbacks in this cycle, depending on how things play out. The name to know right now when it comes to Penn State's quarterback board is Michael Van Buren from Baltimore St. Francis Academy. He profiles as the top dog at the position right now. Luke Kromenik from Florida State, the Florida State commit. Penn State was really pushing for him, got him on campus for a multi-day visit recently, but he's shut down. He's pretty solid with the Seminoles now. So now all eyes are on Van Buren. He has a June official visit scheduled. The intel kind of indicates maybe he wraps things up before then. But right now he has a commitment date set for July 8th. He'll be at Penn State for his official in June, and there are a lot of people in State College who feel good about this one coming together in favor of the Nittany Lions.
Okay, so we've talked about all the excitement. I hate to pour the cold water on this, but right now Penn State just outside the top 5 in the team rankings, which is great, but ahead of them is Big Ten East foes Michigan at number 3, and then Ohio State right now is the number 1 class. How much pressure is there on the trail for Penn State to keep up with those programs?
I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to you just need to keep up with the powers within the conference. And in this situation, Ohio State and Michigan, they're those powers. You need to keep, if you're Penn State, you need to keep stockpiling talent across the board at every single position if you want to be able to compete with these programs. So yeah, it's definitely a point of emphasis for Penn State's staff. James Franklin, he wants to keep the best players in Pennsylvania. That's a priority he's been able to do at this cycle, but it goes far beyond that when it comes to competing with Ohio State and Michigan. You need that national brand on the trail that Penn State has been able to really hit it off there recently in these last couple classes. You're starting to see the footprint expand a little bit, going into Wisconsin and getting Donovan Harbour and potentially Corey Smith. So you're seeing Penn State go into places and have success in places, and that plays a really big part in being able to keep up with Ohio State and Michigan. Yes, you need to be able to recruit regionally, but you got to expand outside your typical pipeline. Penn State's been doing that. That plays a big role in their ability to keep up with Ohio State and Michigan. And we'll see how that continues to progress as this cycle rolls on, because there's a long way between now and the early signing period.
Yeah, about 8 months. So we are a long ways away from this thing being over. We got a bonus question for you in the chat here. Just want to get your thoughts on this. Jason asking, Tyler, anyone in the transfer portal that could throw off Penn State's recruiting strategy? Anybody of interest there?
You know, it is interesting because James Franklin said coming out of spring practice, they were looking to add on the defensive line, potentially at wide receiver. You've seen some offers go out on the offensive line as well, guys with multiple years of eligibility. So the short answer to that, I would say, is yeah, it does, because if you're bringing in transfer portal guys with multiple years of eligibility, it does affect your numbers in future classes, because you need to plan for scholarship counts and everything of that nature. So right now, I would say Penn State's in the early stages of exploring the portal in the spring. Bunch of offers out. We're seeing how that board shapes up. So right now, there are no hard names I could give in that regard, but I think we're going to start to see something come together with that pretty soon.
All right. Good to know. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for all that great info.
Thanks for having me.
You can get more of that great info right here at Lions 24/7. You got a lot of great information there when it comes to football recruiting and just the news coming out of State College. Clearly, it is coming out fast and furious, so be sure that you check that out. Also, for all the diehards out there, which if you are watching this show right now, I know you want a piece of this, 50% off annual VIP memberships. To get that VIP membership, you're going to get information that your other friends and other buddies talking sports with you are not going to get. So be sure to take advantage of this. It does expire at midnight though, so as soon as we say goodbye, make sure you go take advantage. We're not going to say goodbye though, because we have some viewer questions to answer here. But before we get to some viewer questions, I have a feeling that we're going to have some big news coming out of here in just a little bit. So I'm going to stall and I'm going to make the people wait, because I'm going to tell them to go ahead and hit that like button. We are 6 likes away from 100. 6 likes, that's it. We got 150 people watching right now. I know we can get that. We've got some news to hit you with in just a few minutes, but I'm stalling until we get to 100. But I can't stall much longer because I'm excited to hear some news too. So Blair, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you this question. Are we any closer to a decision from the #1 player in the class, Dylan Raiola?
Emily, we were asked this question last week as well, and I pointed out that Dylan Raiola was planning to be in Los Angeles to train with his quarterback coach, and I would look at possibly him going out to USC to check out the Trojans in their spring game. I've been told he didn't make it to the Coliseum, so I am ready. I'm pulling out the phone right now, and I'm going to log a crystal ball prediction to Georgia to land the #1 overall prospect in this 2024 class. The top-rated quarterback is obviously high on the Georgia Bulldogs. He's been high on Nebraska and USC as well. Oregon has, in a way, been in the battle as well. But, you know, the only official visit he has locked in is to Georgia. It does sound like he could be closing in on making a college commitment. And I always said if he was going to be able to make it back to LA, check out the Trojans, and Lincoln Riley would have another chance to make an impression, I would still think that the Trojans had a shot. That didn't happen this weekend. I've been told that there's no real plan for him to get back to LA before he makes a decision. So all arrows right now, Emily, are pointing toward Kirby Smart pulling in the #1 quarterback in this class.
Wow, there's been a fun little battle at the top of the rankings here in April between Ohio State and Georgia that would certainly put the back-to-back national championship team over the top if they were to land Dylan Raiola. Now, I remember the question that we had on Thursday's show, and the way that it was phrased was, do you think that there's some sort of divide that's going on between Dylan Raiola and USC, if that they were drifting apart almost like it was some sort of relationship? And you said that if he does not show up to their spring game this weekend, that you're not going to feel good about this. And there's been some flip-flops when it comes to these crystal balls that have been out there, but you've been staying pretty steady. So this means something, right, Blair? I mean, it took a lot for you to be able to flip this. You feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, and let's just put it out there. I'm not the first to put in a crystal ball to Georgia.
You are
There's
not.
a number of other crystal balls to Georgia, and the Bulldogs have, I think we've told it and we've said it a number of times. They've been the leader here in the clubhouse for a few weeks now, at least since he got back from that trip to Athens and even made it out to Lincoln, Nebraska to check out Matt Rule and company. But yeah, I do think that now all the momentum is firmly with Georgia. And although it did sound like Dylan Raiola was planning to take all official visits, we heard him say it here on this show when we spoke to him at the Polynesian Bowl in Hawaii back in January that he was going to take his time, pump the brakes, go on some visits, and then make his decision. Well, he's only taken unofficials, has not taken one official yet, and it does sound like he could come off the board before he even makes those officials. I think that's how strong that lean is right now to Georgia.
Wow. Okay, I don't have nearly as much power as you, but I can use my phone to just go look at the crystal ball that you submitted for him. But big news here to end the show, and it seems like we've got some Dogs fans watching right now because we have officially reached 100 likes. So thank you all so much for that. We got a few more questions we want to get to, though. This one comes from Hannah. She says, I can't remember the last time a kid decommitted from a school, committed elsewhere, and then flipped back to his original school. I think talking in reference to our opening headline today. Blair, do you have any memories of a roller coaster recruitment like this one out west?
I would say that the one that comes to mind is Jordan Payton. He's a receiver that played at UCLA. I think was drafted in the 5th or 6th round and played a couple years in the NFL. But he had commitments, Emily, to Cal, to Washington, to USC, to UCLA. Ended up flipping on National Signing Day when it was traditionally on that first Wednesday of February. So that's at least 4 public commitments that Jordan Payton made. Then you also have to look at Chris Steele, another player from Southern California who ended up playing at USC, had enrolled at Florida, participated in spring practice, transferred, had also committed to Oregon at some point, was an early commitment to UCLA as a freshman. I mean, that's at least 4 schools right there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of up and down recruitments. And to the question by Hannah, and to the point, I guess there aren't many instances of a player decommitting from a school, flipping to someone else, and then flipping back to that original school. It rarely happens. So what Landen Thomas is doing is obviously special, and it goes to show you that even though Florida State might have felt, in a way spurred, right, or maybe felt like they had been left at the altar for the #1 rated player at that tight end position, he's that good that they didn't let up. And you might kind of chalk that one off or cross it off the list and say, oh well, he's just committed to Georgia. Look at what they're doing at tight end. Look at what they're doing on the field, winning back-to-back national championships. That says a lot about what Mike Norvell is trying to build there, that they're going toe-to-toe with the nation's powerhouse right now for the #1 player at that position.
Never give up. That's the theme here, Blair. Comment here from Andrew. I love this. Says, Emily has fewer like begs a show than Blair has crystal ball flip-flops. I think he means more because I do beg for likes so many times on the show. But guys, I'm just doing what the earpiece is telling me to do. It's not me. If you don't like this video, I won't take it personally. No, I actually do really like it. It makes me feel kind of happy. Let's answer this question from Harrison. How do you think Florida sits with 5-star Colin Simmons?
I think the Gators are in a good spot. We spoke a couple weeks ago about how they needed to get a big commitment heading into the spring game, coming out of the spring game. They just needed some sort of momentum when those coaches are wearing that polo with the Gator logo on the chest, heading into those spring evaluation meetings and going out to see prospects. And they were able to get that with Xavier Filzami, the 5-star safety from the state of Texas. Well, Colin Simmons is another player from the state of Texas that Florida is in on. The crystal ball right now is pointing towards LSU. That's a crystal ball from Steve Wiltfong, and we don't take those I think with a grain of salt. I think you have to really look at that crystal ball and think it has a lot of validity. But Georgia, Florida, Texas, a number of other schools are also in the mix there. They're trying to push. But right now, it does look like the Tigers, the LSU Tigers, have some of the momentum there for Colin Simmons.
You got to be specific. There's 3 Tigers in the SEC alone, so you got to make sure that you say LSU Friend, thank you for the little bit of Blair flair you added to the show today at the end. We appreciate it. For Blair Angulo, I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.